What would you do if you discovered that the very manager you trusted most was secretly dismantling the company you built from nothing with your own two hands? No one inside that little bakery knew that the man who had just walked through the glass door, hands in the pockets of a worn jacket and a faded baseball cap pulled low, was Elias Monroe, the founder of Maple and Hearth, the bakery chain he had built from nothing. All they saw was a tired-looking customer who gave a faint nod as a young employee greeted him with the familiar line she had clearly memorized. "Welcome to Maple and Hearth, where every pastry is a slice of memory." Elias smiled softly. That was the slogan he wrote 5 years ago when the very first store opened. This store. Today, he wasn't back for a quality check or a rare PR photo shoot. He was here to quietly investigate what had begun to rot the dream he had poured his youth into. Revenue was falling. Customer feedback had turned sour. Yet, the internal reports were suspiciously clean, too perfect to be real. He had already hired independent auditors and even a consulting group to probe deeper, but all it had yielded was a suspicious silence. Only one option remained. He had to see it for himself. Elias chose a window-side table, just far enough to observe both the counter and the kitchen door. He ordered a slice of berry bliss and a black coffee, the same combo he used to taste test every morning when he still ran things hands-on. But today, taste was the least of his concerns. As he pretended to scroll on his phone, Elias overheard a hushed conversation between two employees near the kitchen. The girl who had served him, named Sienna, and a younger boy named Marco. Their voices were low, but one name stood out clearly: Noah. "It's so unfair. Noah just reported Rick for skimming from the register, and now he's stuck with constant night shifts. He was on track to be promoted to assistant manager. Now he's lost his morning shifts, had his pay cut. Worst part, Gavin from regional came down, but all he did was smooth things over for Rick." Elias froze. Rick, the current branch manager, was no stranger to him. He had interviewed the man himself 2 years ago, back when this location was just beginning to thrive. And Gavin, the regional director, was someone Elias had once trusted completely, someone he'd given full oversight of the Northern Territory to while he expanded the brand beyond the state. Those names now rang like blades cutting through the polished shell of a system that was supposed to be running flawlessly. Elias tightened his grip around the coffee cup. He could no longer taste the mellow sweetness of molasses or the tart freshness of wild berries. What lingered instead was the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. This bakery, into which he had poured his very soul, now held whispers buried under routine, sighs ignored by upper management, and silence where truth should have lived. And this was only the surface. Elias knew that if he truly wanted to save Maple and Hearth, he would have to dig deeper and go further, under a new identity, from within these very walls. Elias sat silently in the corner of the bakery, his eyes fixed on the large-frame man with slicked-back hair who had just emerged from the office with a phone wedged between his ear and shoulder. Rick Bennett, the branch manager, barely glanced at the employees as he walked by, treating them like pawns waiting for instructions. He plopped down into the leather chair behind the management counter, crossed his legs, and pulled out a wad of cash from the drawer beneath the register. Elias squinted. The surveillance camera overhead, the very system he had personally approved, had a sticky note covering the lens. The reason? Lens fogged, awaiting maintenance. A ploy so subtle no one would question it unless they were actively searching for something wrong. As Rick continued chuckling with a few familiar employees and patrons, the glass door swung open again. In walked a sharply dressed man in a charcoal suit, his expensive cologne lingering faintly in the air. Elias recognized him instantly. Gavin Rhodes, the regional director overseeing the entire Northern Division. Rick morphed into an entirely different person. He stood up straight, smiled brightly, personally poured Gavin a cup of coffee, and ushered him to the VIP table, a spot normally reserved for loyal patrons. Elias watched in silence. Gavin should have been the one siding with employees when reports of misconduct surfaced. He should have scrutinized every line of Rick's financial statements. Instead, he wore the blank expression of someone pretending nothing was wrong. And when Rick patted Gavin's back with an air of familiarity, the two of them whispering and chuckling in the corner, Elias understood that every should have had already been sold out long ago. It was the first moment Elias felt like an outsider in the very game he had created. He wasn't angry about the fraud itself. He was angry that he had once believed. Furious that his trust had been used to cover up the cruel treatment of workers like Noah. A young man pulling shifts from dawn to midnight simply because he dared to speak the truth. And worse, it wasn't just Rick, but also Gavin, the man who once claimed to protect the legacy of Maple and Hearth, who was quietly complicit in enabling this. When Rick stepped out from behind the counter and clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the young man Elias remembered from the payroll list, instructing him to clean the restroom better than last time, Elias felt something tighten in his throat. Ethan said nothing. He just nodded and quietly walked off like a shadow. No one stood up for him. No one questioned Rick. No one questioned Gavin. And in this little kingdom they had built, everything Elias once believed about the culture of kindness was being trampled right before his eyes. He couldn't look away, but he couldn't act just yet either. To cut this rot from its root, he had to find out if the decay was shallow, or if it had already sunk into the very heart of the system he once called family. 3 days later, at the very same bakery, a new guy appeared wearing the Maple and Hearth uniform, a light brown apron, a navy blue shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. No one noticed that the man was actually Elias Monroe, the founder of the brand they all worked under every day. On the application form, the name Eli Marsh was listed, along with a modest work history at 2 small coffee shops that had since closed, and a single note in the margin, willing to do anything for a chance. Rick hadn't read it carefully. He just glanced at the form and nodded. "This place is short-staffed. If you're breathing, you're hired," he muttered with a half-smile. Elias began his first day learning how to operate the register from Sienna. She spoke quickly and kept glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone might catch her explaining too much. "Rick doesn't like wasting time on temps," she whispered, then added with a dry laugh, "Just follow what I do. Don't act too good, but don't mess up either. Just enough to survive." Elias understood that her advice wasn't just about the job, it was survival strategy. That afternoon, Ethan arrived for his shift, 3 minutes late because his bus broke down. Rick stood at the door, glanced at his watch, and growled, "Next time I'll cut your evening shift, got it?" Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded quietly, tied on his apron, and got to work. Elias was assigned to join Ethan in restocking supplies, a seemingly simple task that gave him a close-up view of raw injustice. Ethan worked non-stop, recalling everything from memory, never needing a note. "I was once trained to be assistant manager," he said, eyes still on a box of cake mix. "But then..." He went silent, slamming down a crate as if to crush a thought he hadn't dared to finish. Elias tried to ease into conversation. He shared stories from Eli Marsh's past, a guy who had to drop out of college and wash dishes at a 24-hour diner to stay afloat. None of it was real, but the sincerity in Elias's eyes couldn't be faked. Slowly, Ethan opened up, and in that moment, Elias realized that behind the quiet compliance of this young worker was a storm that had been suppressed for 2 years. Suddenly, Rick's voice boomed from the office. "Ethan, get ready. Health inspection's coming through. You're in charge of the prep station." The whole shop snapped into tension. Elias had never seen a health check cause such panic. But what shook him more was how Ethan simply nodded and sprinted away without any help or backup. Elias watched, then turned back to the storage room and quietly pulled up the digital inventory records. The numbers didn't add up. There were clear discrepancies. He knew he was on the right trail, and the game had only just begun. That afternoon, as the bakery quieted down, Elias pretended to wipe tables near the hallway leading to the office. Through the crack in the slightly open door, he heard the familiar deep chuckle of Rick, mingled with the scent of expensive cologne. He didn't need to look to know that the man inside with Rick was Gavin Rhodes, but this time they weren't laughing like they had that morning. Gavin's voice was low and cold. "Word is, someone at headquarters has started paying attention to this location's numbers." Rick replied with a dismissive snort, "Let me handle it. None of the staff here dares say a word. And that kid Ethan, I clipped his wings a long time ago." Elias stepped back slightly, a chill running down his spine. This conversation was no longer just suspicion. It was the first piece of undeniable evidence. That night, Elias returned to the store after closing, using a spare key he had copied from Rick days earlier. In the dark, he replaced the fake camera with a real one, camouflaged to look identical, and linked directly to his personal server. He dusted the safe's handle and keypad with a special UV powder and marked a few large denomination bills inside. Every step was executed quickly and silently, like a seasoned detective preparing for an ambush. Over the next 3 days, Elias dug deeper into the rotting web that had taken root under his watch. He volunteered for extra hours in the stockroom, offered to help reconcile invoices, and made sure to accidentally pass Rick's office during Gavin's usual visits. He photographed altered inventory sheets and compared them to original data from the early days of the business. But what chilled him most was a folder he quietly accessed on Rick's computer, a file labeled G Fund, containing a spreadsheet that detailed regular bonuses sent from Rick to Gavin. Each month's total exceeded 4 digits. One night, while cleaning the kitchen alongside Ethan, Elias finally broke the barrier of his disguise. "You weren't wrong to speak up," he said quietly. Ethan flinched, eyeing Elias warily. Elias continued, his tone calm and steady. "I've seen this kind of thing before. It starts with a few missing 20s, then becomes hundreds, then thousands. If no one speaks, the rot spreads." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "I did speak. Instead of thanks, they stripped everything I worked for." As Ethan's gaze drifted away, Elias saw not just anger, but a kind of quiet surrender in his eyes. And that was the moment Elias knew he couldn't turn back. If all he did was replace one manager, it would be like cutting off a branch and leaving the roots to fester. It was time to rip it out completely. The proof would need to be irrefutable, and the reckoning would have to come at the heart of the storm. He had chosen the moment. Everything was in place. The plan would begin on Saturday, the 8th anniversary of Maple and Hearth, the day the cash register would be fullest, and the day Rick would dig his own grave with his own hands. On Saturday morning, the atmosphere at Maple and Hearth buzzed more than usual. Cream yellow balloons and ribbons adorned every window frame. A handwritten chalkboard sign reading 8th anniversary, buy one get one free on the entire menu from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. drew a line of eager customers that stretched beyond the sidewalk. But among the excited crowd, only one person knew that today would not just be a celebration. Elias, still in his familiar disguise, walked into the store at 7 a.m., his eyes flicking up to the ceiling. The camera was still in place, the tiny activity light behind the plastic housing blinking steadily just as it had during his final check the night before. The plan was in motion. His heart pounded not with fear, but with a deep certainty. Today would not end with a soft landing. From 9 a.m. on, the shop was flooded with customers. All 3 registers ran non-stop, and the staff were sprinting from counter to counter. Rick thrived in the chaos, laughing loudly, pretending to help with the cash count, while slyly slipping out marked $20 bills inked with Elias's invisible UV dye. Each time he did it, he'd shout over the noise, "Sienna, I'm double-checking your drawer again. Don't mess it up this time." No one in the crowd noticed, but Elias didn't take his eyes off him. Gavin Rhodes arrived precisely at 11 a.m., polished as always, shaking Rick's hand amidst the constant chime of the front door and the buzz of receipt printers. Elias moved behind the bar, pretending to adjust the espresso machine while monitoring the security feed on his phone. In the office, Rick was counting the cash, sliding it into an envelope. Gavin opened his blazer, reached out his hand, and took it without hesitation, the movement so natural it was clear they'd done it dozens of times. Every frame was recorded. At 12:15, Ethan stumbled into the main floor carrying a tray of anniversary pastries just as a wave of customer orders peaked. One misstep and he nearly spilled the entire batch. Rick pounced. In front of everyone, he barked, "Are you drunk, Ethan, or just useless? I've been too lenient already." The store went silent for a beat. Ethan pressed his lips together but said nothing. From behind the counter, Elias clenched his fists, knowing full well this would be the last time Rick publicly humiliated a decent person without consequences. Finally, at 1:40 p.m., Rick pulled Gavin into the center of the cafe and proclaimed loudly, "See for yourself, over $6,000 in sales this morning. Who deserves a raise more than me?" Gavin laughed and slapped Rick's shoulder like a proud mentor congratulating his star pupil. Watching them, Elias felt a surge of fury and disdain. Every final piece of evidence was now in his possession, and tomorrow morning the entire truth would be made public, with no place left for anyone to hide. But before that, there was still one person he needed to protect. Someone being pushed to the very edge. That person was Ethan. The afternoon light stretched long across the tiled floor of the bakery as Ethan shuffled past the rows of tables, a cleaning cloth in hand, and eyes void of focus. For 7 hours straight, he had worked without rest, without a single moment to sit down, and without one word of thanks from his superiors. Only harsh orders, snide remarks, and cold, dismissive looks from Rick. Sienna brought him a cup of water, gently saying, I told Rick you needed just 10 minutes to rest. Ethan simply shook his head. I can't afford to look weak. They're waiting for me to slip. At 4 p.m., as the crowd thinned out, Ethan carried a heavy tray of pastries past the VIP area. A small slip of his step made him sway, nearly spilling everything onto a guest table. Rick immediately jumped up, his voice cutting through clenched teeth but loud enough for all to hear. Are you drunk or just born stupid, Ethan? Heads turned. Ethan stood frozen. The tray was still steady in his hands, not a single pastry out of place, but the damage was already done. The hurt had reached its limit. I haven't had even a minute's break since morning, sir, Ethan said, his voice shaking but clear. Rick stormed toward him, his face twisted with rage. Excuses now? You think this is the place for whining? Trying to play the pity card? At that moment, Gavin rose from the VIP table, feigning seriousness. This level of service is unacceptable. I'm very disappointed. Elias, still behind the counter, felt the fury inside him pull tight like a cord ready to snap. But he didn't speak yet. Not yet. The final confrontation happened at 5:10 p.m. After clearing the pastry display, Ethan had just unfastened his apron when Rick called out, loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear, You've been reported for unprofessional behavior. I'll be filing a formal report. If you don't like it, the door's wide open. Ethan turned, his eyes bloodshot. I've stayed quiet for 2 years thinking I needed this job more than my dignity. But today I realize it's because I stayed quiet that I've been walked over like this. Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice into a threat. Say one more word and you'll get no severance when I fire you. Think hard. Ethan gave a cold chuckle. Don't bother. I don't need someone like you to grant me anything. He folded the apron neatly, set it down on the counter, then turned to Gavin. You're this man's superior? Then I see clearly now why this place is rotting from the inside. And with that, he walked away without looking back. No one stopped him. But in the air, something shifted, like a storm had passed and the skies were clearing. Elias stood still for a moment, then glanced at the clock. Only one thought echoed in his mind. Tomorrow, everything would change. And Ethan, the young man who just walked out, his shirt soaked with sweat, would be the first to be rewarded. The next morning, as the bakery doors creaked open to welcome the early shift, a man in a deep navy suit walked in with a calm stride and eyes colder than ever before. A wave of stunned silence swept from behind the counter when Mia, the cashier, recognized those eyes, so familiar it sent a chill down her spine. Elias Monroe, no longer in disguise or hiding beneath a cap, was standing at the pastry counter of his own shop. Good morning, he said softly, like a breeze slipping through. Please let Rick Bennett know that I'm the owner, and I need to speak with the entire staff immediately. Just minutes later, Rick appeared disheveled, his chin unshaven, a phone still in hand. Mr. Monroe, if I had known you were coming, I would have prepared. Elias cut him off with a smile devoid of warmth. You've already prepared, Rick, for the past 18 months. The words fell sharp, like the blade of a knife. The small back room behind the counter filled within 20 minutes. Mia, Jordan, Sienna, Marco, and even Gavin Rhodes, hurriedly called in by Rick, were all present. Elias stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on a tablet connected to the wall monitor. Some of you know me as Eli Marsh, he began. Others know me only through a photo in the employee handbook. But today I'm speaking to you as the founder of this brand, someone who has always believed every employee is a foundation, not a burden. A light tap brought the monitor to life, displaying a sequence of video clips. Rick appeared clearly, pulling money from the register and sliding it into an envelope. Then came the footage of Gavin accepting the envelope and slipping it into the inner pocket of his suit. A few staff members gasped behind their hands. Jordan stared down at the floor. Sienna exhaled deeply, as if she had been holding her breath for this moment. This was yesterday, Elias said, his voice steady but cold. I also have every altered receipt, every falsified inventory record, and a recording of the two of you, in which Mr. Gavin suggested handling the Ethan situation internally. Rick shot up from his chair. You can't... Sit down, Elias said, not raising his voice, but the room froze all the same. Gavin pulled out his phone, but Elias was quicker. He placed a USB drive on the table. Everything has already been sent to the board of directors, including your plan to seize control of the shop through covert share transfers. Two police officers stepped into the room right on cue. Elias nodded. Rick Bennett and Gavin Rhodes, you are officially suspended and being turned over to the authorities for charges of financial fraud and abuse of power. Rick shouted a curse, but the cuffs were on before anyone could react. Gavin said nothing. He simply lowered his head and walked out, eyes stripped of all hope. As the door closed behind them, Elias turned back to the staff. I owe you all an apology for letting this happen under my own name. He paused, his gaze settling on Jordan, who was trembling. I know you were the one who reported Ethan, but I also know why. Jordan gave a small nod, tears falling down his cheeks. Elias continued, you're not going to be fired, but if you stay, you need to choose a different path, a better one. Mia stood up, her voice shaking. Ethan, what is he doing now, sir? Elias smiled. I'm on my way to see him, and I'm not coming empty-handed. That late afternoon, Elias pulled up in front of an old row of apartments tucked away at the end of the street, where the cracked sidewalks and peeling walls seemed to have long forgotten the meaning of hope. He stepped up the crooked stairs of Unit 17B, took a deep breath, and knocked. From inside, the soft sound of footsteps echoed. When the door opened, Ethan stood there, wearing a faded t-shirt, eyes sunken as if just waking from a restless sleep. The moment their eyes met, he froze. You're... Ethan began, then paused. He looked closer. Eli. Or rather, Elias Monroe. Elias nodded slightly. I know I owe you a lot of explanation, but first, may I come in? The small apartment held only a worn-out chair, a few boxes of instant noodles in the corner of the kitchenette, and a laptop still open to a job search page. Elias sat down and handed Ethan a thick envelope. I saw everything. How you were treated and how you kept showing up. And this morning, everything changed. Rick and Gavin were arrested. The system will be rebuilt, from the ground up. Ethan opened the envelope. His eyes widened, then froze. Assistant manager? With a salary almost double? Elias nodded. And a clear path to full management within 12 months, if you choose to take it. Ethan said nothing. His hands trembled as he set the letter down. I thought I was just a discarded cog in a forgotten machine. Elias replied gently, and I forgot that it's the small cogs that keep the whole engine turning. Ethan asked quietly, what about people like Jordan, like Sienna? Elias smiled. Jordan will be given a second chance with oversight. And Sienna? He paused for a beat. If you accept, she'll be your first shift assistant. She's earned it, and she doesn't know this is coming from you. For the first time in a long while, Ethan's eyes lit up. I accept, but not for the money. I want to prove that people like Rick aren't the end of every story. Elias stood up and extended his hand. Then let's begin again. Tomorrow. You won't be walking in to bow your head anymore. You'll be walking in to lead. The next morning, the doors of Maple and Hearth opened under the soft glow of early sunlight. Ethan stepped in wearing a crisp white shirt, collar perfectly pressed, his face no longer marked by weariness, but instead carrying a calm, mature resolve. As he walked past former co-workers, those who once looked at him with hesitation, now looked up with surprise and quiet respect, Sienna ran up and threw her arms around him. I knew it! I knew one day you'd come back, but I never imagined it would be standing like this. Ethan smiled softly, his eyes scanning the pastry counter, the barista station, and the staff now stepping into place with care. We're going to start over, the right way, with the right spirit, true to what the name Maple and Hearth was always meant to carry. In the days that followed, change did not come through posters hung on walls or long-winded meetings, but through Ethan's quiet presence. He did not manage through orders, but through empathy. He noticed every shift scheduled too tightly, every sigh in the middle of a rush, every new hire fumbling with their first transaction. And with his calm, steady voice, he guided each small moment, as if laying down one brick at a time to rebuild the foundation Rick had once shattered. Elias did not show up every day, but he closely followed the progress, from the surge in positive customer feedback to a 177% jump in quarterly revenue, despite increased operating costs. At the first monthly meeting after the restructuring, Ethan placed a stack of reports on Elias's desk and said, "Maybe respecting people is actually the best business model." Elias nodded, resting his chin on his hand. "I forgot that, somewhere along the way chasing numbers, and you just reminded me." One late afternoon, before leaving, Elias stood outside the shop and looked through the glass. He saw Sienna guiding a new staff member, Jordan, now working in the kitchen, carefully slicing cakes to match the new standard. And in the center of it all, Ethan moved through the space, adjusting a misaligned tray, leaning down to help an elderly customer find the nearest bus stop, then smiling as he returned to the counter with the weightless posture of someone no longer crushed by burden, but carrying others instead. Elias smiled gently. He opened his phone and sent a brief message to the board. "Let this branch be the model, not because of profits, but because for the first time in a long while, I see my brand truly living as a home." On the chalkboard by the entrance, Sienna had written the new slogan. In white chalk, simple yet profound. Not just pastries, a place where people are baked whole again with trust. In the corporate world, a smoothly running system is not always the sign of a healthy organization. Sometimes, silence, obedience, and polished numbers conceal a deep-rooted illness that only courage and truth can heal. Elias did not just reclaim his brand, he rebuilt the culture from its very core, where people are placed above profit. If you believe that justice does not come from the top, but from those who dare to speak up at the right moment, like this video, subscribe so you won't miss more real and powerful stories, and leave a comment with the phrase "Dare to Rise" to help spread this important message.